Hello. Just by looking at the tracks left by a given vehicle, it's very hard to guess what kind of vehicle it was, let alone who was driving it, but still, whatever small clues I could find in Malta, I'm gonna share them all with you in this video. So, as I showed you in the previous episode, we have no clue how these vehicles were powered because we can't find any prints of hooves or people who could have dragged, pulled, or pushed these vehicles. So, for now, we can only conclude that they were not powered, they were not propelled in a very primitive way, but there are no clues what kind of power they were using actually. It's not even clear if these were vehicles on wheels or sledges, but the tracks themselves, they appear to be V-shaped, much narrower at the bottom, maybe some 10 centimeters. At the bottom, that would have been the width of the wheel or whatever sledge, something like that. And then at the top, they can be so wide that I could comfortably lay down in some of them. No idea what could have caused the V shape, but vehicles of this sort tend to leave straight ruts with vertical sides. So this is the typical situation. At the bottom, you can often not even squeeze your foot inside, it's so narrow. And at the top, you can lay down in the track. This V-shaped has been acknowledged, recorded, and accepted by other researchers as well, but there hasn't been a single explanation about it so far. And then I noticed another curious detail which I did not read anybody mentioning so far. The thing is that too many times I noticed that there is unproportionately more stone, or it was earth that later on petrified as stone, on one of the sides of the tracks. For example, now you see on the left track there is much more stone on its left side than in the middle. Of course, the first thought also for me was, oh, this is simply an erosion. The erosion has eaten up more of it on one side than the other. But when you are out there on in the fields, and there are small things that you start noticing, like for example, there will be very vague tracks that are imprinted in the surface. Later on, when I show them here on the footage, they can't be seen, but such minor tracks, they show how the surface was. So I really got the impression, although I'm not 100% sure, that as if the soil was moving in an interesting way sometimes when these vehicles were traversing through it. I'm not saying this is the only explanation of what I observed, but certainly it is one of the explanations. Like, look here. We have so much mass on the left side, and on the right, as if petrified mud that got splashed just a few centimeters of it, and on the left side, this would be like 40 centimeters high. And then sometimes on this lower surface, you would have very vague also vehicle tracks, which shows that the mass on the lower side did not disappear because of erosion, but it was never there. So who is shifting this mass as the vehicle travels?
And if that wasn't puzzling enough, let's talk about the evidence for suspension in the tracks. Yes, the concept of suspension is not really a new one. There have been carts and chariots with complex suspension systems officially dated, back to the 14th century, maybe earlier than that. But the kind of suspension observed in these tracks, and this is not the only example, there are other places, is something far more dramatic. The track you see on the left is approximately 30, 40, or even more centimeters deeper than the other one. Now, if this were a modern car, with the wheels on one side 40 centimeters lower than the other, you would expect to find the vehicle traveling with a tilt. So, the expedition group was checking very carefully the tracks for any tilt. However, by the end of it, they were just left wondering, was there any tilt at all, or were they just imagining things? It was really hard to say, but the point being is that if there was any tilt, it was very slight. And so this raises a question: if this was a vehicle traveling at any speed, how did it manage to stay upright with such an odd wheel configuration?
So how old are these tracks anyway? They seem to be pretty old. Everybody seems to agree, at least on that point. Here we see them ending over a cliff. And this is not the only example. In general, the face of the earth has changed a lot since they were made. Uh, on the top of them, there are various historic layers like a Roman or even so-called Punic. For example, officially, this is a Punic rock-cut burial chamber right in the middle of Clapham Junction, the field that is considered as being richest in tracks all over Malta. You can see that it overlaps tracks here, a pair of tracks. You can see them now on the left. Only God knows if this is really a burial chamber. Is it really Punic? Is it really 2,000-3,000 years old as the official dating of the Punic things? That is suspicious because it's mainstream information. But definitely these rock cut things, they are on the top of the tracks, and also their walls, even those that are exposed to weather, are visibly of different colors. So this is definitely younger than the tracks. And here's another example of something dug in the ground or maybe cut in the stone in the very proximity of the tracks, just a couple of centimeters on the side, and they added these small channels, one on the top and one on the left, to channel water inside and probably use it for irrigation, something like that. This is an example of secondary, maybe modern use of the tracks of the ruins when they are already ruins. This can be seen at a couple of places, not just one. For example, earlier I showed you how tracks end at a sharp cliff. Just few meters on the side there was a similar irrigation system, but without a tank. There were channels made in such a way that they will go down the cliff and probably water some garden below it. Everybody agrees that this is a secondary use of the tracks. Also, sometimes they go in the sea. People who swim have seen them underwater at different locations. Some report that the ones underwater are very huge. Sometimes they're found at very deep locations. So, definitely, the face of the earth was way different when the tracks were left. To be honest, in terms of a tourist destination, I wouldn't recommend Malta. Just the rocks and wind. That's what you get there. But in terms of history, I must admit it's a really, really rich. For example, we were just walking with my friend in Rabat and he was eating a banana and he wanted to throw the peel somewhere and he thought that there could be a waste bin in a nearby construction. But because he is a well-mannered person, he decided to first have a look before throwing the actual peel over the fence, and he was surprised to discover something he really didn't expect. And over there at the far left corner, there seem to be tracks. And again, the rock cut ruins seem to belong to a much later period and built on the top of the older tracks. It's good when we get a glimpse of the historic sites before they get destroyed for the purpose of historic study by the so-called restoration teams like the catacombs at Bistra. They were a normal historic site just hundreds of years ago when they found them, and this is what is left of them now. How can you study their relation with the tracks when everything around is cemented? Such tracks are not unique to Malta. Identical tracks are found in abundance in Turkey, Italy, Spain, Crimea, Russia. And exactly as at all the other places that I just listed, the ruts, the tracks at Malta, don't exist just like that independently of any settlements. They do show connection to very ancient rock-cut ruins. But before getting into the details of the connection with the ruins, I would like to show you why it seems that the tracks at all these locations are actually left by the very same civilization. Based on various marks, imprints, and roads around the tracks. First of all, these cuttings or marks, not sure, they look as if they were cut into the stone or dug out when it was earth. They seem to be of the same age as the tracks and are often found besides the tracks. Although it's hard to say what was their purpose exactly, I saw exactly the same cuttings many times in Spain, in Italy, and this really makes me think that same models of vehicles were leaving the tracks at these places. And then we saw a lot of these marks in Malta, and as well they are present in all the other locations that I listed earlier with tracks. Actually, to fully understand the meaning of the tracks of Malta, you should watch also my videos on the tracks of Turkey, Spain, and Italy. Because once you see those images, you will realize that it is absolutely the same thing spread all over a large region of Asia and Europe, and the photos will speak for themselves. It will become clear these are traces of the same people who I call them the Aigil civilization, but once they inhabited a large region of the earth. This is similar, but yet another type of marks. They look like a modern excavator, but we saw them in all these countries that I listed, places on paths where modern excavators could not have reached. They also display the same rate of erosion as the tracks and the rock cut ruins around them. In other words, they are historic, there is no doubt about it. What you see now is footage taken right next to the famous Clapham Junction tracks in Malta, which are considered to be the biggest site with the ruts in Malta. This is practically next to them. It's just nowadays a garbage place. It's not considered a historic site, but the walls are historic, as you can see. They are also with heavy erosion marks. And then we saw a couple of what now we would call rock cut roads, which is again the most typical scene that one can see in Turkey, in Italy, in Spain. Rock cut roads with tracks on them and all over the area around them. Maybe they were rock even at the time when the most of the tracks were left in the soft soil, because on this road, as you can see, we don't see any deep tracks, and on the sides it kind of gives the impression that it could have been cut in the rock, and also on the sides, on the very edge, it has those typical small canals, or they also look like vehicle tracks. At places they were very clear, very well pronounced. Sometimes not so well, but certainly they were there, always in Spain, in Italy, and also there in Israel and so many other places. I was always wondering if these are tracks, then what kind of vehicles would have, were scraping the walls of this road. Right now, on the far left, you can see the rock cut wall of the road, then canal. At places, it was even much better visible. And then somewhere in the middle of the screen, you see these typical marks that were running all through the road. This road was one of the two better preserved roads that I could see in Malta. It was leading. It was a historic road. There was even a label. It is accepted as such by everybody. It's not modern. It was leading to some sort of what they call a Bronze Age temple. Well, it is. The ruins are in such a bad condition that you can put whatever name you wish and whatever dating, and let people believe it. You cannot find any proof about anything against such dating. So these are the ruins to which this particular road was leading. There was another road right at Clapham Junction in the midst of the tracks. So this particular area with the road and the ruins, yes, there were all these holes and cuttings and platforms. They were clearly man-made, but they were so vague, barely visible, that there was no way to guess what was actually going on and who lived here. And then these imprints seem to be another type of tracks by themselves, and they're again found all over these regions that I've been telling you: Turkey, Italy, Spain. Sometimes they're mixed with the regular tracks, and sometimes they're found on their own. They're not modern. They can be seen on boulders which are turned over and eroded. They can be seen at places where modern equipment doesn't have access. And at one place, it was extremely interesting. These tracks were going on for, let's say, over 100 meters, making turns, going downhill. And at one point, I saw them turning into regular tracks, the deep ones. When that happened, we were already having constant rain for a week, and we were just completely wet. Our cameras were wet after jumping over a couple of walls. Although we did have raincoats, even our boots and shoes were dripping full of water. And the camera simply refused to take footage. Indeed, I'm surprised that it took any footage afterwards. But anyway, on the last day, just before departure, we had some time without rain, and I specifically returned to that place to search for it again because I thought it's quite amazing. All these thin marks turning into thick tracks, but I could not find it again. Sometimes we were left with the impression that when the vehicle, if it was a vehicle, was going downhill, it was leaving this type of horizontal marks as well, and on more even surface it would be only two lines on the side. But then again, we would see the shorter lines in the middle, sometimes even on more even places, or maybe they were not even, maybe they had stones at that time. It's hard to say because this is a relatively well preserved segment here, but the rest was heavily eroded or on boulders that have been turned over. This type of situations. So this type of track was going downhill for a couple of 100 meters and then uphill. There was a field with regular deep tracks. And then right next to them, there were these ruins that were not mapped as a historic site anywhere and apparently are just now fencing private property. But a couple of right angles could be observed, and this wall was definitely dressed. Hewn stone, the chisel marks were clearly visible, maybe not on the photograph, but this is the best I could take in the rain, and the very terrain was very difficult to walk, just sharp stones everywhere. And then you step on some greenery which is only covering a puddle, and you don't know how deep it is. You only find out when you start swimming in it. But these excavator-like marks were definitely much more interesting. Now, first of all, this is on a path on the side of the hill where no modern equipment could have had access. It is actually very steep. It didn't come across so well on the photographs, and it forms kind of a also rock cut road, although you can't see it very well again. On the image, actually, these lines are mixed tracks with all these excavator marks. And this road was leading straight to the rock cut ruins you can see at the background. Road, I mean old road. Right now it's a very steep pathway only, but I guess that it must have been a road once upon a time. Because definitely we see standard tracks on them besides the excavator marks, and all this again is on very steep surface. Probably too steep for a modern car, for example. Now let's go to those grottos that we saw on the earlier images in the distance. Apparently they are not in prime condition, and at the first sight somebody may even doubt, are these like natural rock shelters? But no, actually on the walls, wherever there are still any walls left, you can see clear traces of chisel marks, and even at some spots plastering and painting on the top. So these were proper premises once upon a time, and right in front of them, literally 2 meters in front of the row of entrances, there was a track. It's not the most spectacular one, and it's single, but it's most definitely a track. A single one, not sure if the other one fell off the cliff as all this is falling apart, or it is hiding in the thorns on the left side. But the important thing is here the proof about the connection between these old cut ruins and the tracks, and these proofs are everywhere in Italy, in Crimea, in Spain, in Turkey, just hundreds of them. These two things, very eroded rock cut ruins and tracks, go together. And as far as the earlier rocket chamber, officially labeled as Punic, that was much younger than the tracks, that was on the top of the tracks, that is also absolutely normal because we saw the same thing even in Italy. The younger rock cut ruins, those of Etruscan style, they were also built, the very necropolises or whatever dwellings, they were built literally on the tracks, on the old road. Apparently, that was not a functioning road anymore when they built their burial chamber or house on the top of it. So basically, again, this is a confirmation that these vehicle tracks, the deep ones, they are connected with the older generation of rocket ruins, which unfortunately don't look that of a great place to live anymore nowadays. And the two places I just reviewed are not the only ones where the connection between the old rock-cut ruins and the tracks can be seen. For example, at Clapham Junction, the place famous for having the largest amounts of tracks in Malta. Again, these grottos are not in prime condition. Only when you get closer you can see the chisel marks on the walls. Even officially, they're recognized as ruins. Don't get confused with the walls of undressed stone. That is absolutely modern. This is the way Maltese people fence their gardens. The historic stuff here are the huge dome-like cuttings. And one particular more narrow place got somewhat better preserved. This is the spot. Probably it was a drainage of some sort, or I don't know what exactly. But the main point is these ruins are man made grottos, stone dwellings. And the tracks, they descend right into them. Yes, they go down. You can see a track here on the right hand side. It's not the most spectacular one, but it is already 1 or 2 stories below ground level. And stairs leading into the stone dwellings start right from them. And all this is not at some secret or inaccessible location. This is right in the middle of Clapham Junction, the most famous site with ruts with car tracks in Malta. And tell me, what kind of people will claim that they have spent there on expeditions months and months with groups and equipment and heavy funding, and at the end they are telling me, oh, and it's such a mystery. The roots don't seem to be connected with anything. They're just an enigmatic mystery. Are they really? I don't think so. To me, they look more like a history that you need to look at. And while the public attention is being diverted by talks about enigmatic mystery, at the same time, the grottos, these are the actual holes. They're quite big of the grottos. They're being closed down. And then what you see in the front is agricultural activity. Somebody has brought soil from somewhere, has filled up this historic site, and is growing his or her agricultural produce on the top of it. And again, all this is going right in the center of Clapham Junction, the biggest site with vehicle tracks in Malta. What I consider extremely interesting about this site is the thickness of the ceiling. Now, these are the big grottos below, trees are growing in them, and just in a couple of seconds you will see that these brown lines here are actually tracks. You will see it very soon from the proper perspective. Now you see how they are actually tracks and they continue here. What kind of surface it was? I was really under the impression that it was soft, but then how did it not give in? I mean, how did the ceiling not fall inside? Or if, let's say, the grottos belong to a later period, then how come the tracks are descending in them? Actually, the ceiling is so thin that it must have been hard, like it must have been stone if the chambers and the tracks belong to the same period. And then why the tracks appear to be left in something soft? Were the vehicles so high tech that they were melting the stone as they slide? Even if we assume something as far-fetched as this, still it doesn't solve the main problem. The ceiling is too thin for anything. And this is not the only case. For example, same thing can be observed in Sardinia, Italy. Very, very thin ceiling and tracks are right on the top of the rooms. But the biggest of all surprises during this expedition was when I saw, without searching for it specifically, my tracks crawling on the side of supposedly medieval star fort. First I took them to be tracks, but actually they are those excavator marks. Those same excavator marks that I saw on the side of a rock-cut road with tracks in Spain where no modern equipment could have reached. Those same excavator marks that I saw so many times on the ancient vehicle tracks in Italy as well, and those same excavator marks that are regularly seen along the ruts tracks in the fields of Malta. And they're definitely not vehicle tracks here in this example on a road climbing on the side of a star fort in Malta. They look exactly like excavator marks. Do you notice how they go sideways as if climbing on the walls? Vehicle tracks would not do that. They wouldn't bump in the wall all the time. But how come these ancient excavator marks are on the side of a medieval fortress? Well, watch the next video about the results of this Malta expedition to find out that the alleged medieval fortress has a fake history and is actually built on an older rock-cut base, which is also star-shaped.